The Keddie Cabin Murders is one of the most gruesome and mysterious unsolved cases in American history. On the night of April 11, 1981, 4 people were brutally murdered in Cabin 28 of the Keddie Resort in Northern California. Despite a thorough investigation and numerous suspects, the case remains unsolved to this day, leaving many questions unanswered and a small community in shock. The case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and articles, but the true story of what happened that night in Cabin 28 remains a mystery. In this article, we will delve into the background of the Keddie Resort, the victims, the discovery of the crime scene, and the investigation and suspects in an effort to shed some light on this tragic event. Background on the Keddie Resort. The Keddie Resort was a small vacation spot located in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California, about 30 miles east of the town of Quincy. The resort consisted of several small cabins, a main office, and a small store, as well as a playground and a pool. The cabins, which were primarily rented out on a weekly basis, were rustic and basic, with no electricity or running water. Despite the simple accommodations, the resort was a popular destination for families looking to escape the city and enjoy the natural beauty of the mountains. Cabin 28, where the murders took place, was a 2-bedroom cabin located at the end of a dirt road, away from the other cabins and the main office. The cabin was rented out to the Sharp family, who were staying there for the weekend. The location of the cabin provided a certain degree of privacy and seclusion, which would later be considered a possible factor in the killer's choice of location for the crime. At the time of the murders, the resort was managed by a couple named John and Susan Sharp, no relation to the Sharp family victims, who lived on the property with their children. The resort was considered a safe and peaceful place, with no history of violent crime. The murders, therefore, came as a shock to the small community and sparked fear and concern among the residents and visitors of the Keddie Resort. Victims. The victims of the Keddie Cabin Murders were Glenna Sue Sharp, 36, the mother of the Sharp family. She was a single mother who had recently moved to the area with her children. She worked as a nurse's aide and was described as a kind and caring person. John Sharp, 15, the eldest son of Glenna Sue. He was a sophomore in high school and was described as a well-behaved and respectful young man. Dana Wingate, 17, the eldest daughter of Glenna Sue's friend, who was staying at the cabin for the weekend. She was a senior in high school and was known to be outgoing and friendly. Tina Sharp, 12, Glenna Sue's daughter. She was a 7th grader and was known to be quiet and reserved. All 4 victims were brutally murdered in the early hours of April 12, 1981. Glenna Sue, John, and Dana were found dead in one of the bedrooms, while Tina was missing. The cause of death for all 4 victims was blunt force trauma to the head. Tina's body was found 3 years later, in a nearby ravine, with the cause of death also being blunt force trauma to the head. The murders of Glenna Sue, John, and Dana were particularly violent, with signs of struggle and multiple wounds on their bodies. The fact that Tina was missing for 3 years, her body recovered far from the cabin, and a different cause of death from the other victims, led to speculation that the killer or killers may have had a personal vendetta against Glenna Sue and her family. The brutal nature of the murders, and the fact that a child was among the victims, made the case particularly shocking and tragic, and has continued to resonate with the public to this day. The families of the victims continue to grieve for their loved ones and hope that one day, the killers will be brought to justice. Discovery of the crime scene. On the morning of April 12, 1981, Glenna Sue's 14-year-old son, Ricky, discovered the gruesome scene in Cabin 28. He had spent the night at a friend's cabin and returned to find the door to Cabin 28 locked and the lights off. He assumed his mother and siblings were still asleep and went to knock on the door, but it was then he noticed a strange smell and the door had been tampered with. He went to the office to report his findings and the manager, John Sharp, went to investigate the cabin with Ricky. Upon entering the cabin, the manager and Ricky found the cabin in disarray, with blood stains on the walls, floor, and furniture. Glenna Sue, John, and Dana were found dead in one of the bedrooms, while Tina was missing. The cabin had been ransacked, and it appeared that the killers had taken some items from the cabin, including a clock, a VCR, and a stereo. The bedroom where the 3 victims were found had signs of struggle, and the room was covered in blood. The discovery of the crime scene sent shockwaves through the small community, and the authorities were immediately notified. The cabin and the surrounding area were sealed off as a crime scene, and an extensive investigation was launched. The authorities searched for any evidence that could lead to the identification of the killers and the whereabouts of Tina. The fact that the cabin was located at the end of a dirt road and away from the other cabins provided the killers with a certain degree of privacy and seclusion, making it easier for them to commit the crime and escape unnoticed. The remote location also made it difficult for the authorities to gather evidence and witnesses. The discovery of the crime scene and the subsequent investigation marked the beginning of a long and frustrating search for the truth behind the Keddie cabin murders. Despite the efforts of the investigating authorities, the case remains unsolved to this day, leaving many questions unanswered and a small community in shock. Investigation and suspects. The investigation into the Keddie cabin murders was extensive, with over 100 people interviewed and numerous suspects considered. The authorities searched for any evidence that could lead to the identification of the killers and the whereabouts of Tina. The investigation involved multiple agencies, including the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, the California Department of Justice, the FBI, and even a private detective. One of the most notable suspects was Martin Smart, a handyman who had worked at the Keddie resort. Smart had a history of violence and had been seen acting suspiciously around the time of the murders. He was also known to have had a disagreement with Glenna Sue over money. Smart was interviewed multiple times, and even took a polygraph test, but he always maintained his innocence. Despite being a prime suspect, the authorities were unable to gather enough evidence to charge Smart with the murders. Another suspect was John Sharp's friend, Brett, who was seen leaving the cabin on the night of the murders. Brett had a history of drug use and was known to have been in the cabin on the night of the murders. He was also interviewed multiple times, but like Smart, he always maintained his innocence. Other suspects include former renters of the cabin, acquaintances of the victims, and even John Sharp, the resort manager, who was cleared of any suspicion after he provided an alibi. The investigation also included the search for any possible motive for the murders. Some theories suggested that the murders were committed as part of a burglary gone wrong, while others suggested that the killers had a personal vendetta against Glenna Sue and her family. Despite the efforts of the investigating authorities, the case remains unsolved to this day. The authorities have considered that more than one person was involved in the crime, or that the killer or killers have died or are in prison for other crimes. The case remains open and the authorities continue to review any new information that may come to light in an effort to solve the case and bring closure to the families of the victims. Conclusion. The Keddie cabin murders remain one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. Despite extensive investigations and numerous suspects, the case has never been solved. The families of the victims, as well as the authorities, continue to hope that one day, the killers will be brought to justice. However, for now, the case remains a chilling reminder of the evil that can exist in the world and the devastating impact it can have on families and communities. Case Update 2022. The investigation is ongoing and former Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood believes the murders were planned to a certain degree, and current detective Mike Gamberg believes they are closer to solving the case than ever before. Investigators believe that there are 2 individuals that are alive and are accessories after the fact. Law enforcement has been sorting through new evidence and leads.